Hey everyone. Hey, obviously, news has changed over the last couple of days, been upgraded significantly because of the Trump assassination attempt. And listen, I want to present to you guys that I personally believe this was an inside job. It's too obvious. I'm going to point out some things. And just so you know, also, I am on vacation. I'm out of the country, way down south in Mexico. And pre-recorded both Sunday morning, Sunday night, and also the Tom Hughes report. But I wanted to give you guys this update because obviously it's pretty significant, the things that are continuing to develop, and they will. But let's roll with some things. First of all, I'm going to show you a video. And this video is bizarre. Some of you have probably already seen this. It's this young lady. She was on the platform directly behind Trump. And what you're going to see is just before the shots, she's standing with everybody. She sits down. It's almost, you watch it. Tell me it doesn't look like she knew something. Just before the shots, she sits down. And what's way more bizarre is what happens after Trump is shot. And all of a sudden, you're going to see her. It's this weird look on her face, like she's up to something. She knew what was going on. She pulls out her cell phone while everybody else is screaming, hiding for cover, doing whatever with Trump and everything, right? Doing those things. All of a sudden, she just pulls out her cell phone. She's sitting in the front row behind Trump with this weird look on her face, like, this is great. I'm telling you, either one of two things happen. Either this woman is really, really weird. She's got a weird issue going on in her head. She's obviously a super narcissistic person, or she is somebody who, it's an inside job. She's totally a part of it. And she was planted there knowing exactly what was going to happen and knowing when the shot was going to take place. So really, it's only one of two explanations. She's totally narcissistic and a weird lady, which may be both cases. And then the other is she's a plant. Watch this video. It's short and it is weird. All right. Okay, you see that? Let's work through a couple of other things. So DC Drano, he says this. I'll show you this other video first. This other one, pretty much everybody has seen this now. It's the video that was taken out in the open, and people have told the police officer, hey, there's a guy up there on the roof. Almost everyone has seen this video. I mean, I'm way down south, almost in South America, and I've seen it down here. And I've seen it probably 100 different times, but it is bizarre. It's obvious that the police knew what was going on. I mean, I don't see how you can, you look at this and go, how could they say they were competent? They weren't part of it. I mean, how could the Secret Service not know? How could the FBI not know? Listen, I personally believe by looking at all these things, there's people inside Trump's campaign, inside his circle, that are part of the deep state. There's just no other explanation in my mind right now. Maybe something else will come out in the future. Also interesting how the only person who could have testified anything, he was shot dead, you know? So, I mean, but you look at all of this, something very nefarious is taking place on the inside of Trump's own people. I don't know how else to describe it. Also, I think Luke chapter 12, I'm going to go there in a minute to help you see that, how it connects. We can see this biblically. But right now, watch this short video. This is the one you guys probably already saw, and then I'm going to come back with a couple more comments after this one. This is with the guy on the roof. The normal people are aware of it. Watch this.
He was doing the job. I wouldn't even be doing this. I'd be at some beautiful places, the gorgeous ocean.
Look, they're all pointing.
The Atlantic, maybe the Pacific.
Yeah, someone's on top of the roof. Look. There he is right there. Right there, see him? He's laying down. See him?
Yeah, he's laying down.
Instead, I'm here with you fighting like hell to get a Senate.
What's happening?
And to make sure we take back the White House, because if we do, we're going to make America better than ever before. We're going to make it.
Yeah, look.
And it's
There he
not
is.
easy, because we have millions and millions of people in our country that shouldn't be here. Dangerous people, criminals. We have criminals. We have drug dealers. We have people that should not be here.
On the roof.
It's much tougher than it happens.
You went right on the roof, big guy.
Okay, so obviously authorities knew about it. How can you say FBI or whoever, Secret Service, didn't know about this? There's just no stinking way. Now, DC Drano comments. He says the Secret Service snipers had eyes on the shooter. People were screaming about a man on the roof with a gun, but Secret Service waited. They waited for him to take the shots. Then they killed the shooter. It was a setup. And he wasn't supposed to miss. And then he says, his kid's 20 years old. How did this kid walk around those open fairgrounds with a long rifle undetected? How did he bring a giant ladder? How did he get on the closest roof to Trump? How was he allowed to take 5 well-aimed shots at Trump? The answer is now obvious. It was an inside job. I mean, I could go on and on about all of these things. Let's start putting this stuff together. Luke chapter 12. Jesus talks about the takedown of a family, takedown of a people. What's he say? He says, a family divided against itself, a people divided against itself cannot stand. America is obviously divided, and the left is out to just destroy this country. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. But it's total, this is about a takedown of America. That's my opinion. You can disagree with me, but it seems pretty obvious. It seemed obvious for quite some time. But in Luke chapter 12, people or a family divided against itself cannot stand. That's happened. A couple of verses later, Jesus says this: if the thief is going to take the house, he must first bind the strong man. Right now, you look at the globalist attempt. What the strong man is the United States of America. They've got to bind the strong man. It was Kissinger who said that America stands in the way of this globalist deep state regime. I don't think he used the word deep state, but that's what he's talking about. The United States Constitution is the problem. America is the problem. The United States is being bound. You have people on the inside, obviously now, both the left and the right. So people who say there's nobody on the right that's on the inside, oh yeah, we've been saying it for a long time. There's evil people on the left, there's evil people on the right. Regardless of what your thoughts are about Trump, this is recognizing what is really going on here. Okay, now when you work it out into the grand plan, we know that ultimately America's not going to exist in the form that we know it, because we know biblically how things are going to turn out. I believe we're going to see that Jesus is coming back. I don't know when. I believe that we're not going to have genuine peace until Jesus comes back. I believe the Bible is very clear on that. I believe also when you look at the way the Bible tells us, evil men will wax worse and worse, 2 Timothy chapter 3, that means things are going to get worse and worse before they get better. Instead of say it's going to get worse before it gets better, it's going to get worse and worse before it gets better, but it will. It's going to be awesome, because all of these things are just a reminder of the world that we live in. And I want to remind you of this. God is sovereign. God is in complete control. There's evil men that are trying to destroy everything. We are living in a battle that is spiritual, and I think we forget that sometimes. We don't battle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. As a believer in Christ, you guys should all know this. You guys know this. It is a spiritual battle, but Jesus is on the throne. And right now, this is who we should be calling out for, Jesus. I also believe this, that the world is being set up, especially the Western world is being set up for a political leader to come on the scene. Antichrist. I do not believe Biden is Antichrist. He doesn't have the brain power. I do not believe Trump is Antichrist. So for all of those things, no, I think it's foolish to start going down that path. Personally, some of you guys may disagree with me and get really mad, but what is happening right now, people are so emotionally charged. I said this a few days before the assassination attempt. People are already so emotionally charged that they are going to do whatever it takes to get their leader. And Antichrist is going to come along with a solution to both the right and the left. And because listen to what people are crying out for right now. the right and left, we need help. We need hope. We need to come together. And listen, these are the people who called us deplorables. If you're on the right, they told you how evil you were. They're the people that called out for the assassination of Trump. Those are all terrorist threats. If that came from the right, you'd be in jail. But so we look at this. But what's happening is people are going to get more and more emotionally charged. A call for unity is going to happen. And I believe it's a setup for Antichrist who will come. I don't know when he's going to come. We look at the dynamics that are going on in Israel, and we look at all of these things geopolitically that are lining up. Folks, we live in amazing days. So I look at all of this. What do we remember? God is sovereign. He raises up kings and he deposes kings. That's from Daniel chapter 2. We are in a spiritual battle. Do not forget that. This world is on edge. They are looking for a leader, and a leader is going to rise. And folks, I really don't believe Trump is Antichrist. All right, no matter how many of you people want to tell me that he is. It's recognizing we need to be looking to Jesus Christ. U.S. has been divided. There's traitors on the inside. But again, listen, I'm going to pray for this nation. I believe that we need to be pressing forward. I'm not someone to just give up and say, because Jesus is coming, therefore doing nothing. No, Jesus is very clear. There's two things also in the Gospel of Luke we are told that we need to be doing. In fact, Luke chapter 12 also. We should be watching. There's a reward for those who are watching. That talks about watching for the Lord to return, and also who make themselves ready. Making themselves ready is the righteous acts of the saints, the things that we do to press forward with the hope of the gospel. I'm not going to quit, not going to give up. Neither are you guys. But let's move forward. We focus people on Jesus Christ. We're going to be involved. And listen, right now I have this video that I did with Bill Federer, and it speaks volumes to everything that we see going on right now. It is unbelievable. Bill and I were able to talk about things before they happen. So watch this with Bill Federer. We're going to get into what is going on in America. Again, we recorded this before. Tomorrow, I'm going to come back with another update for you guys. God bless you guys. You're going to love this time with Bill Federer, but keep our eyes fixed on Jesus Christ. We are looking for Jesus Christ. The world is being set up for Antichrist. Watch this.
Welcome, everybody, to Hope for Our Times. And, oh, man, are you in for a treat today? You're going to be super blessed. My guest is William Federer, who is an internationally recognized speaker, best-selling author, and serves as president of AmeriSearch, focused on researching America's rich heritage. He hosts the daily radio segment, America Minute, that presents the Faith in History television program on the TCT network and DirecTV. He has appeared frequently on television networks such as C-SPAN, Fox, NPR, and has been a guest on radio programs including Focus on the Family and the Salem Radio Network. Plus, I happen to know that he's on social media because I follow him on Instagram and thoroughly enjoy his regular posts on there. Just absolutely fantastic. Bill, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Tom, great to be with you.
We are going to have a terrific program. In all seriousness, I want to thank you for your short posts that you put on Instagram. It's just great. They pop up in my feed every day. I get to watch them and go, man, this is so cool. And so straight and educational. I love it.
Well, my son is the one doing all that, and I'm very impressed with what he's doing.
I bet. I bet it takes someone younger to do the things like I do. I don't even know how to do anything other than watch. So I'm going to cover a few things with you. You have this particular book, Silence Equals Consent. You have various chapters in here. One is on Christian nationalism, rights from God and not from government. You have another, Globalism Began at the Tower of Babel. You talk about Diocletian, the Roman emperor. Another one, what king believed, kingdom had to believe, meaning the people had to. You have a section on church influencing the state, which is the way it should be, plus a lot more. But I have a ton of things in here to ask you, and I have a ton of my own questions to ask you. And if you're good, I say we just get going with some things.
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to start here. There's a couple of quotes. This is one from this book on socialism. Plato warned that freedom unrestrained by private moral virtue would eventually lead to licentiousness and sexual promiscuity, where you present the cases throughout history where the warning was there. Once you get to this point, it's an end of a society. Another quote in the same section from Aristotle, who said, tolerance is the last virtue of a dying society. And I look at that and think, well, I mean, that's all we hear about is tolerance. And tolerant of everybody except for us. So as we work through this, let me ask you, you talk about affluence affecting people. Basically, we get softened up, and that wasn't your exact words, but as I'm reading the quotes from historians, from presidents past, from kings past, from Plato, Aristotle, you have just tons of them. Scholzenstein, who really warned of this. And this is where we are in America, where America seems to just want their, hey, just keep us happy. And now we're very soft. You talk about, you have another section on, which we'll get to, on the lack of courage and how the warning has been there. And this is what happens. People become cowards. What are your thoughts along these lines?
Yeah, so civilizations have life cycles, and they go from like a plant, a little seedling, then a sapling, and then they're bearing fruit, a period of maturity, and then they start rotting and dying. And so when you study civilizations, you see these patterns. Now, one anthropologist named J.D. Unwin, Unwin, Oxford, he wrote a book in 1934 called Sex and Culture. And this is about the time Sigmund Freud's writing books on all the, but he says that after studying 80 major civilizations over 5,000 years of history, that the trends are that sexual promiscuity always precedes the collapse of a civilization. And he says that the life cycle of a civilization is sort of like an athlete, right? When an athlete's young, he's disciplined and focused, and he watches his diet, and he wants that championship. And then he works hard, and finally he gets it, and he is the champ for a couple seasons. And then he gets a little lazy and a little eats fatty foods, yet in his mind, he still thinks he's the champ. But he gets challenged into the ring of competition. He gets the tar knocked out of him. And then he's replaced by the new up-and-coming civilization. And so in his book, Sex and Culture, J.D. Unwin even describes what he called a sexual marketplace. Well, before I get to that, he says that the four major stages that civilizations go through is a period of pain and poverty. They go through war, they go through famine, and they make it through. In Israel's case, they come out of slavery in Egypt. And then they work hard, and they become productive. And then they work together, and they become patriotic. And then they end up becoming prosperous. And then they want to enjoy their prosperity, and they get promiscuous and weakened and lazy, indulgent, and then they get conquered. And so the first stage is they go through this period. So when he called it a sexual marketplace, he says when the women as a group say that nothing happens unless there's a commitment. The guys make the commitment and then go out and work hard to be productive to make their wife happy. And the next thing that happens is little kids appear, and the guy has another emotion called being protective of his wife and family. And when all the men of the country are productive and protective, well, the whole country becomes productive and protective and innovative and creative and expansionistic and even militaristic. And but when the women as a group say, there does not need to be a commitment. Well, guess what? Water seeks its own level. You'll have a bunch of guys that they're selfish and they want to be pleasure focused and they want to enjoy their immorality, and they end up becoming irresponsible and indulgent. And then there are fewer kids born to fill the ranks of the military. And then the kids that are born are undisciplined. And when enough of the men of the country do this, the country gets unorganized and weakened and then conquered. And so J.D. Unwin said it's unstoppable. He says it's irreversible, that when a nation gets to this promiscuous sexual stage, that there's no turning back. Why? Because human nature wants the pleasure. And when the floodgates are open and you can have it unrestrained, it's hard to put it back, right? Once the dam is broken, you can't really put the water back. And so now he talked about in Athens, they were a democracy and there was no king. And so Plato says that this democracy, this government without a king, goes through 5 stages. The first stage is rule of the capable. And these are people that work hard. They know how to run farms and businesses. They know how to run city governments, and they're just going to do what's right no matter what anybody says. And the city grows. And then there's another group that wants to get involved in politics, and they don't know how to run anything. They just like the attention. And they see those other guys getting the attention. So these are busybodies, or maybe they're a athlete from the Olympics that everybody knows their name, but they've never run a business. Or maybe they're a famous admiral and they, are courageous, but they've never run a business. And so these people get involved in politics because they like fame. They hate being defamed. And so these people will be controlled by public opinion, right? So with the first group, they're going to do what's right, say whatever you want. The second group, they're going to bend based on what people are saying about them because they like fame and they don't like being defamed. And so Plato called these people's timocracy, a lover of fame and honor. And since they don't know how to run stuff, they end up becoming irresponsible financially and using their position to pad their pockets and their friends and their family, and use their position of power to take away money from their political opponents. And before you know it, Plato says that it's ruled by lovers of money. So these are people that, will give a government contact to a friend, or Nancy Pelosi's husband is this brilliant stock market analyst that, it looks like he has inside information. Somebody developed an app that tracks congressmen's investments, and it's like 30% better than any investment firm. Right? It's like because they got inside information. So they're doing favors to themselves. So Plato says you go from lovers of principle and truth to lovers of fame and honor to lovers of money. The country divides into 2 groups, the haves and the have-nots. And in Plato's steps here, the people throw the bums out and they set up a pure democracy, which is great. And the chief characteristic of a democracy is tolerance. Everybody tolerates each other. It's wonderful. He called it the most charming form of government. And then they tolerate people that are a little bit off. And then they tolerate people that are a lot off, till finally they're tolerating lawlessness. And it turns into chaos. And he says criminals just walk openly on the streets and there's no security. And that's when the people begin to say, we need someone to come along with enough power to restore order. And that's when somebody comes along. At first, he's a protector. He's all smiles and he promises everything to everybody. But then he begins to consolidate power, and people cast it in his teeth that he's getting too powerful. And he has a choice: give up the power or get rid of the people confronting him. And since Plato called him a lover of power, because you go from lovers of principle and truth, lovers of fame and honor, lovers of money, lovers of tolerance, and now it's lovers of power. And they purge their military of anybody with virtue, and all they want is yes men. And they eliminate their political rivals, and they finally stand up in the chariot of state holding the reins of power, and they're revealed as the tyrant.
The tyrant.
So democracy without the people having morals and virtue turns into chaos, out of which a tyrant arises. And you got that with ancient Israel, right? They got the law. When the priests stopped teaching the law, every man did what was right in their own eyes. Turns into chaos, the concubines being raped. And then out of that, what happens? You get a tyrant named Saul. The French Republic did it. right? They had King Louis XVI. They get rid of him. They're a republic and they're tolerating everything. And it turns into lawlessness and 30,000 people get their heads chopped off in Paris. And it turns into, and so out of that chaos, you get what? A Napoleon. So if you want to be a dictator, the first thing you want to do is you want to create chaos. And then people begin to start begging for some strong leader to restore order. So you want the cities to be filled full of crime. You want to let the criminals out of jail. You want to let illegal. You want to let it get where people say, we need the government to come in. And the government says, okay, we're going to take away your Second Amendment. We're going to take away your freedom. We're going to track everyone. We're going to have cameras everywhere. We're going to, right? And you do it on a local level, national level, and then ultimately a global level. They went global. This is called the Great Reset. They went global crises. And everybody says, we need somebody to come along with enough power to restore order. And that's when you get the Antichrist, right? And so it's a predictable pattern that you can see. It grows from Nimrod Tower of Babel, but anybody that can plot sees that at some point it's going to max out on a global level. And Jesus says wheat and tares grow together till the harvest.
But Bill, this is fantastic. I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm thinking, I read these things. I don't know, your memory must be pretty amazing because I'm just tracking with everything as I'm reading in here. But here's just some of the quotes that you have under a section, loss of morals and courage. Domestic insecurity and upheaval signal weakness to surrounding nations. Unrestrained immigration is followed by outright invasion. And then you write, Solzhenitsyn explained that when a society is consumed with selfishness, citizens lack self-sacrificing willingness to defend it. And then as you proceed through here, your next section is just what you said. Who can fix this? Fix this mess. Plato described how once citizens give up virtue, they yield to passion and become financially irresponsible, which is describing today. The resulting chaos, anarchy, and insecurity causes them to look for someone to come along and fix the mess. And then this is a quote from Plato, insatiable desire and neglect introduces the change in democracy, which occasions a demand for tyranny, or that's your quote. But I look at this and think, so I've been saying this for years as I've been teaching Bible prophecy, that the things that we watch happening right now, they are intentional with the blown open borders, the lawlessness in the streets. These things can be easily fixed. What we're watching here is you say defund the police. And although we aren't hearing it publicly anymore, it is happening. The police are being defunded. Their hands are being tied. So we bring down the law keepers. We take them from their positions of power, or we clip their wings, so to speak. So we've done that. At the same time, our government leaders, whether it be city, state, counties, country, have brought in their leaders to make sure we have lawlessness abounding while you clip the wings of the law keepers. And so what are you going to have? And then you open up the borders to, as you even quote here, it becomes an invasion. This is what we have. So biblically, this is what I've seen. In Matthew chapter 24, for example, Jesus said, lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But at the same time, you have an Antichrist who comes along and makes sure he keeps control of the lawlessness. And I've said this many times. What's really strange in the last days, you have both things that seem to be the opposite of each other, but they're both working together in the last days in order to bring about the kingdom of Antichrist and his absolute oppression over the masses of the people. And what you're describing is, now Plato talked about this, Aristotle talked about this, kings, presidents in our own country, former leaders, but say this is exactly how they do this, because this is how it's been done in history, hence it is being done right now.
Yeah, in just a easy to understand, practical, I ran for Congress 3 times. Didn't win, came close. I could get into all the stories, but I was amazed at how the parties will spend 10 years planning to redraw a congressional district map. And they'll actually say, okay, we want to get a majority of our party so we can win this district. So they'll identify every single house, and they'll want to redraw the line to go down one street, cut out another street, go down another street, and they call it gerrymandering, because there was a first one, it was Elbridge Gerry, and he drew this congressional map that looked like a salamander, and so they call it gerrymander. That's where that word came from. But it's this idea that you want to redraw the district boundaries so that you can get a majority for your party so you can win the seat. They found out that there's a lot easier way to do it. You just let crime go up. If crime goes up in the big cities, pro-family people will move out. Well, pro-family people, they're a higher percentage Republican. And then pro-business people will move out. I mean, your stores are getting smashed. The police are ordered to stand down. There's crime. Well, pro-family, pro-business, they're a higher percentage Republican. Well, who's left in the city? More people on welfare and benefits and handouts and, all the illegals. And they are a higher percentage Democrat. And in election years, whoever wins the big city ends up winning the state, because everybody that moved out, their names stay on the voter rolls. So they can do voter fraud up to the amount of the names, and nobody's going to question it. They'll just say, oh, it's a high voter turnout. And whoever wins the big city wins the state, and whoever wins the state gets all the electoral votes for the state, and the president's elected by electoral votes. They've literally whittled it down. The last election, it was 7 cities. All they needed, and they could win the whole country. Detroit, Phoenix, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Atlanta. And so all they had to do was have the crime go up in these inner cities. The pro-family, pro-business people move out, more people on welfare. The names stay on the list. They do the voter fraud. They win that city. They win the whole state. They get all the electoral votes for the state. They add up all the electoral votes, and they win the election. So they literally have a political strategy that includes having crime go up in the big cities.
Wow. That is, so I mean, so you were able to put it based on historical facts. I was able to say some of these things based upon the way the Bible says things are going to end up. This is why things are going this way. This is really amazing. These books are just absolutely amazing, Bill. You have this other one, People Cry for a Protector, which is hence why they vote the way they do, like you just said. At first, a mayor or governor would appear as a protector, promising to restore order, but soon they consolidate power and rule as a tyrant. And then you quote Plato, where Plato wrote, last of all comes the tyrant. In the early days of his power, he's full of smiles, and he salutes everyone whom he meets, making promises in public and also in private, liberating debtors. I think of all the debt from school, school debt, this kind of liberating debtors, distributing land to the people and his followers, wanting to be so kind and good to everyone. This is the root from which a tyrant springs. When he first appears above the ground, he is the protector. And then hinting at the abolition of debts and partition of lands. That's Plato saying this. How many years ago did Plato say that? 2,500 years ago or something like that?
At 380 BC.
Wow, you look at this and go, here we are living it. It's just repeating, as you said, it's a cycle, but that's what we're experiencing in America. And so I have this question for you. Given your extensive research, Bill, what do you see as the most pressing challenges facing America today, and what role can individuals play in addressing them?
Yeah, I did a 2-hour special on Christian Television Network with George Barna, who does polling, and he identifies that the areas with the highest percentage of Christians have the lowest voter turnout. The areas with the highest percentage of Christians have the lowest voter turnout. Why is that?
Wow.
Well, I trace it back to the 1700s and the Pietists. So the 1600s, you had Calvinist Puritans, and they had a covenant form of government where everybody's involved. Everybody's involved in church. Everybody's involved in the civil government. Why? Because it was the church that founded the cities. Hartford, Connecticut was founded by a church, right? Roger Thomas Hooker and his Congregationalist church founded the city of Hartford. There were no non-church members to be lazy and let them run stuff. Everybody, they had one building called the meeting house. That's where the pastor would teach the Bible, and that's where they would do their city business. The word synagogue means meeting house. That's where the rabbi would teach the law, and that's where they would do their city business. And these pastors got their idea from the Bible, the Reformation, like John Calvin, but from the Bible, what part of the Bible? The first 400 years out of Egypt before King Saul. It's called the Hebrew Republic. So around 1400 BC, millions of Israelites come out of Egypt, where they had a pharaoh, and they go into the promised land and push out King Og of Bashan and all these different kings, and the Israelites set up a system where there's no king for 400. It's literally the first instance in all of recorded human history where you have millions of people and no king. And it worked because every single citizen was taught the law, and they were personally accountable to God to follow the law. So you're about to steal, nobody's around. And then you think, God's watching me. He wants me to be fair. He's going to hold me accountable in the future. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. And it creates something in your head called the conscience. If everybody in the country really believes this, you can maintain complete order with no police, maximum liberty. And it worked until the priests stopped teaching the law. You said they did? Yeah, here's Eli, the high priest. His own sons are sleeping with women in the very tent where the Ark of the Covenant is. And then another Levite in the house of a guy named Micah with a silver graven image. The tribe of Dan comes along, steals the graven image, and tells this Levite, come along with us and you could be a priest to our whole tribe with this graven image. And you're like, isn't that one of the commandments? You're not supposed to have those? And then the terrible story of a Levite with a concubine. The law says the Levite is to marry a virgin of his own tribe. Here he is with the woman he's not even married to. And they're traveling and their house gets surrounded by sodomites. And something about that behavior that appears at the last stages of a people ruling themselves is casting off of self-restraint. And the poor concubine's raped to death. And by the time you're grossed out, you read this line, every man did that which was right in their own eyes. Why? Because the priest stopped teaching them what was right in the Lord's eyes. So they lost the fear of God. They lost the knowledge of the law. All they had was this selfish passions turns into chaos, like Plato would talk about. And then in that chaos, they all go to Samuel the prophet, and they said, we want a protector. We want a king. And Samuel cries, and the Lord tells him, they did not reject you. They rejected me. So God's original plan for Israel was to be different from all the rest of the world, for them not to have a king and to have everybody have a personal relationship with God where they're accountable to God. And then once a year, the high priest would sprinkle the blood of the lamb on the mercy seat, and everyone's sins in the nation were forgiven, and they all started the new year off with a clean slate. But it was this idea that each person's accountable to God. Now, why is this important? Because the founders of America looked to this Hebrew Republic, those first 400 years, as the model. That's why they taught Hebrew at Yale and Harvard. And once they get King Saul, he rules as a tyrant. Well, guess what? The kings of Europe looked to the King Saul and on part of the Bible. So King Saul is the divider between England and America. The kings of England look to the Bible for their authority, but they look to the King Saul and on, the divine right of kings. God chose me. And the Calvinist Puritans that founded New England, they look to the pre-King Saul period, 400 years, millions of people, no king, everybody taught the law and accountable to God to follow it. Oh. So why is this important? Romans 13, which says, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. And Romans 13 is understood differently in a monarchy versus a republic. In a monarchy, subjects submit to the king. In a republic, the citizens are the king. The politicians are your servants. You hire them, you fire them, you vote them in, you vote them out, you tell them what to do, right? So all those pastors say, oh, you got to submit to the government. It's like, you need to pick up and go over to China and submit to Xi Jinping. And when the government blows the trumpet, you bow to the statue. Right. But in America, we're the pre-King Saul period. Yeah. We each have an individual conscience. We're accountable to God. Right. We know the law. And so again, kings have subjects who are subjected to their will. Republics have citizens who give consent. So Romans 13 is understood differently in a monarchy versus a republic.
This is, you know what? I look at this is just great, Bill. You have entire sections for people if they're interested in knowing more about the Hebrew roots of the early part of what became America. You have this section on, as chapter 20, after the Pilgrims rejected the communistic plan, they went on to pioneer a biblical covenant model of government drawn from ancient Israel. And then you have these different quotes. The Hebrew language was taught in Oxford and Cambridge in England and in America, at Harvard and Yale, whose coat of arms has Hebrew characters. In 1685, Harvard's commencement address was delivered in Hebrew. 1722, Harvard hired Judas Monas, its first full-time Hebrew instructor, who published a grammar of the Hebrew tongue, the first Hebrew textbook published in North America. You have Yale, Columbia, Dartmouth. Boy, how far we have fallen at those schools. But I look at all of this, and so much of the early part of what becomes America, it is founded on the Hebrew Bible. But I have so many more questions to ask you, too. Can we keep moving? If we've got time, I want to come back to this. Just to put all this into perspective, everybody, when we look at where we are in America, here's another section. This is chapter 13. Children belong to the state. And you wrote, Plato, again, quoting Plato, when the true philosopher kings are born in a state, they will set in order their own city. They will take possession of the children who will be unaffected by the habits of their parents, and they will train in their own habits and laws, which we see, I believe, right now happening in the public school system. And this is why we see school boards that go the way that they will, and it's horrible things that are happening there. But you wrote, this is your comment, children would be raised in government nurseries and schools where they would be indoctrinated with noble lies, a type of Common Core. Lord Acton wrote, this is a quote, official truth is not actual truth. I think that is where we are. By the way, folks, just before we go on, because I really would encourage you, we have both of these books. They are available for a bundle in the Hope for Our Time store, but they're amazing. If you really want to learn, find out what's going on, I would go to the store and get them both, but they're fantastic. Bill, you have so much in here, and we see the state of America and these things that you put in here. And history is indeed repeating itself right now, but most people are just, they aren't paying any attention to what's going on.
Yeah, I tell people history is not prophetic, but it is predictive. Past behavior is the best indicator of future performance. And so if you know history and you know some prophetic, you get a pretty good idea where things are headed. I use an example. Imagine a white piece of paper and I put a dot in the middle of it and I ask you where the next dot's going to be. Well, it could be anywhere 360 degrees. But if I could show you all the dots preceding that dot, and then I ask you where the next dot might be, you can take a ruler and sort of put it up next to them and sort of plot it and take a pencil and sort of draw a line. Say it might be up in this, the right hand upper corner. It's like, if I tell you what's going to happen next, like, I don't know. It's like, okay, humans have acted this way in this kind of circumstance time and time in the past. What do you think is going to happen next? Well, we're in a similar circumstance. We might be moving in that same direction. And again, you put that together with some prophetic, and you can get a good indication of where things are headed.
You certainly can. You even have in here a chapter on fear, chapter 14, the despot uses fear. You have, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Montesquieu. How'd you know that's who I was going to see? Your mind is amazing. Okay, wrote in the spirit of laws, 1748, from 1748, a virtue is necessary in a republic, so fear is necessary in a despotic government. With regard to virtue, there is no occasion for it. Fear must therefore depress their spirits. I mean, we've seen this last 4.5 years. Fear must therefore depress their spirits and extinguish even the least sense of ambition of a despotic government that a single person rule according to his own will. I mean, I look at this and go, this just describes where we are. You quote Thomas Hobbes, 1651. Force and fraud are in war the two cardinal virtues. I mean, I look at this and it's like, wait a minute, this is where we are. And there's just we'll depress their spirits. 1748, he wrote that.
Yeah, so Nimrod wanted people to fear him rather than fear God. And so you begin to have government be weaponized against its own citizens. And so from Nimrod on, the motivating force of governments is fear. It's the electricity. Montesquieu called it the spring, right? So the watches were like new technology back then. And so you would have a watch and you'd wind up the spring, and the spring would exert this pressure, which would keep the clock moving. And so he says the spring of a despot is fear. He needs to keep the people confident. And he describes it, and I'll get into it, but he says that republics, which were in some of these German areas in Northern Europe after the Reformation, he says republics, the spring is virtue. And the people are the king, the people are in charge, and the people need to have virtue. He says monarchies are sort of like kings with strings attached. And their spring, their motivating power is honor and shame. And those are powerful. You know, they would honor, promote somebody, make him a sir, make him a knight, or they would publicly shame them and strip them of their titles or cancel them, or right. But he says despots, their spring is fear. And he says that republics are most prevalent in Protestant countries in Northern Europe. He says monarchies are most prevalent in Catholic countries. A religion with a visible head is more likely to want to have a government with a visible head, right? And then he says despots are most likely in Muslim countries. And there's a king with no strings attached. It's just, how do I feel today? I want to cut off your head. It's like, okay, you know. And so fear is this motivating power. If you think of it, there's two motivating forces, pain and pleasure. And little kids, you go to them and say, do what was right, I'll give you a piece of candy. You don't do what's right, you get disciplined. And in Chicago, they call it the silver or the lead. You do what the mob says, they give you some money. You don't do what they said, they fill you with lead bullets, right? And so these positive, negative motivations, the republic in Protestant countries, the positive and negative motivations are in the next life. I'm being nice to you, and because I'm personally accountable to God, and He's going to reward me, right, in the next life, and or I don't want to do something bad because I don't want to be punished by being sent to hell in the next life, right? So it's motivations, positive and negative, but it's more spiritual. In a monarchy, honor and shame, that's more of a soulish realm. That's more of the mind, and it's the emotions. It's, you know, everybody wants to be honored. And Plato says that you don't really need virtue in a monarchy because people will do immoral stuff, but if the king honors them for it, that's okay. If I lied to some other country and was able to, you know, shice them out of a bunch of stuff, but it helped my king, the king's like, hey, I'm going to reward you for it, right? So you don't have to be virtuous. And then the despot, it's pain or pleasure. It's if you do what the Sultan wants, he gives you a harem full of women. You don't do what he wants, he chops your head off. And if you think of it, there were three kings of united Israel: Saul, David, Solomon. And then, you know, Solomon's son Rehoboam, it split into two kingdoms, never came back together. So the three kings, Saul, David, Solomon, what's the biggest feature about Saul? Well, he was head and shoulders above everybody else. So he was a physical. So Saul was the physical pain and pleasure motivator. And then what was the best quality about Solomon? His mind, right? So he was a mental type of, right? And so that's the honor, shame. And what was David? It was the heart. It was the reward and punishment in the next life, right? You want to please God, you don't want to displease God, and so when you feel a country where everybody's virtuous because they're, you know, accountable to God in the next life, you can walk around safe. Everybody's virtuous. Nobody's going to steal because every person feels, well, I'm accountable to God. But then when you begin to get afraid of your government, what you're feeling in your gut is the change in the polarity flow of power in the country. When you begin to feel a fear of your government, what you're feeling is, instead of the power flowing from the people bottom up, it's now flowing from a dictator president top down. And you can feel that magnetic polarity change in your gut.
Wow. So you have in here talking about a tyrant. This is a quote from Aristotle. A man rules in his own interest and becomes a tyrant. Then you wrote, a tyrant takes money away from his political opponents and funnels it as benefits to his political supporters. And then Plato says a tyrant will attract mobs, hire voices fair and loud and persuasive, and draw the cities over to tyrannies. Moreover, they are paid for this and receive honor, the greatest honor as might be expected from tyrants. So in other words, those who go along with the tyrant. And then he wrote, this is Plato, and you're quoting him, poets are the eulogists of tyranny, praising tyranny as godlike. I look at that, it reminds me of Hollywood, right? What do they do right now? They praise these tyrants that are leading anywhere in the world. It could be China. We can see it in the Muslim world. We see it in our own country. They're praising the tyrants, the poets of our modern society. Again, these are Plato and Aristotle saying these things, and here we are. So I'm going to throw another question out to you. It might seem unrelated, but I don't think it is. It's we see the anti-Semitic groups are demonstrating all over. We're watching this. I think the anti-Semitic groups are exposing themselves for what they really are. It's been subdued, but we're watching them. Where did these come from? Especially when we look at college campuses. Where did these come from?
Yeah, so I actually referred to those in the books and some of that history. But when you go back, you see Israel, and then they were taken captive, 10 northern tribes taken captive, and then Judah taken captive, and then Judah gets to come back, and it's called Judea, and then it's conquered by Alexander the Great, and then they get their independence for a century. Before Jesus, they were the Hasmonean kingdom, but then the Pharisees and Sadducees start fighting, and Pompey, the Roman general, comes in and takes over, and then Judah is a Roman province. And then you have Herod, and then Jesus is born. He has his ministry. He dies. He rises from the dead. The apostles they all get filled with the Holy Spirit. They begin to spread this revival. Nero started the persecution of of Christians. And then Nero had a general named Vespasian, and he's over there trying to conquer Jerusalem. Nero dies. Vespasian has to go back and become emperor. And then Titus goes over and conquers Jerusalem, and they're scattered. But there's still Jews in the area. And in 135 AD, there's a Simon Bar Kokhba, and he's organizing this revolt against the Romans. And Hadrian, the emperor, sends a legion there, and the Jews wipe out the entire legion. Wipe it out. About 12,000 people in a legion. And then he sends another legion. They're wiped out. There's like no record of them. They're just sort of erased from history. So Hadrian decides he's going to send every Roman legion, hundreds of thousands, and they go village by village, house to house, neighbor, and they tear down everything. They kill the Jews, rapes. They put a temple to Saturn on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Hadrian changes the name of the city to Capitolina Aelia, which was his family name. He hunts down every descendant of David and kills him because he doesn't want them looking for another Messiah. Of course, we don't need another descendant of David because Jesus was the only descendant we care about. But Hadrian made sure there weren't any more descendants of David. And then you had him destroy every copy of the law that he could find. And then he changed the name on the map from Judea to Syria Palestina. So that's 135 AD. That's when that area began to be called Palestine. It was Hadrian that gave them that name because he wanted to erase Israel. And so fast forward, Muslims come in, 7th century, conquer, but they weren't they control the area, but it was the non-Muslims that paid the taxes. So they were not in a hurry to make the non-Muslims convert to Islam. But as the centuries went on, the non-Muslims diminished in population, and so the tax base went. And so the Arab Persian Muslim Empire is conquered by the Turks, and then they have a Turkish Ottoman Empire from around the 1100s all the way up till the end of World War I. And so this is where it gets interesting. World War I, half of it took place in the Middle East. And the Turks did a treaty with Germany, and because the Turks had oil and the Germans had guns. And so Kaiser Wilhelm II and Abdul Hamid II did a Berlin-Baghdad railroad. And but Britain didn't. Winston Churchill changed the British Navy from coal to oil, but there's one oil well in all of Britain, in the Sherwood Forest of all places. And yet that's not enough to provide for a whole navy. And so Britain makes a treaty with Iran, Persia, for oil. And in 1908, they formed the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. You know it better as BP, British Petroleum. And so you have Persia, Iran teamed up with Britain, and Turkey teamed up with Germany. Well, Germany loses, Turkey loses. So after World War I, they redraw the map of Europe, they redraw the map of the Middle East. There's no Ottoman Empire. And so Egypt becomes independent, although it's under a protectorate of Britain. France takes control of Syria and carves out Lebanon, which used to be a Christian enclave. France takes a little sliver, or Russia, but the Ottoman Empire is gone. And that's when the British give the British mandate to the Jews. And so two things. The Jews on their own had been buying land in the Ottoman Empire for decades. Where did they get their idea? It's interesting, from Christians. So in America, we have the First Great Awakening, and then you have the Second Great Awakening. And during the Second Great Awakening in the early 1800s, you had Christian preachers saying that in order for the prophecies to be fulfilled, the Jews needed to be back in the Holy Land. And so it was Christians that came up with the idea. So here is a book, Jeffrey Alderman, Jewish Chronicle, November 8th, 2012. He says the Balfour Declaration, which Lord Arthur Balfour is the one who gave the British mandate to the Jews, 1917, says the Balfour Declaration was born out of religious sentiment. Arthur Balfour was a Christian mystic who believed that the Almighty had chosen him to be an instrument of divine will, the purpose of which was to restore the Jews to their ancient homeland, perhaps as a precursor to the second coming of the Messiah. And then he goes, the Declaration of Balfour was intended to assist in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Then you had these Christians in the early 1800s were called millennialists. They discovered in the Bible that Jesus will come back and rule and reign for 1,000 years, and the word for 1,000 is millennial. It was always in the Bible, but prior to then they were studying other parts of it, but now they discovered this. And now the question is, when is he going to come back? There was actually a movement that thought Jesus was going to come back in 1844, the Millerites. And there's big frenzy, it's like 88 reasons why Jesus was going to come back in 1988. But this was 1844. And the whole country was whipped. And then when Jesus didn't come back, it's called the Great Disappointment. And there's all this falling away from Christianity that took place. So they sort of experienced some same things we did. Anyway, so Anita Shapira writes Israel, a History, published in 2014. And she says the idea of the Jews returning to their ancient homeland as the first step of world redemption seems to have originated among a specific group of English evangelical Protestants that flourished in England in the 1840s. They passed this notion on to Jewish circles. And so now these Jews start thinking about, hey, we need to go back. That's when they were on their own, buying land in the Ottoman Empire and just going back on their own. But finally, Theodor Herzl got the vision. 1897, he did the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland, and he was getting supported by Christians. One of them was Henry Dunant, the founder of the International Red Cross, the first recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. He's there, and Theodor Herzl called Henry Dunant the first Christian Zionist. And so here you had these Jews going back there, and they're getting this land. The Balfour Declaration basically gave them the same boundaries that God had promised Moses. And there's two individuals that are worth noting. One is Chaim Weizmann. He was a Jew from Russia. Remember, Fiddler on the Roof, the Tsar chasing out the Jews. Well, some of those Jews go to London, and one of them is Chaim Weizmann, a chemist. And during the war, the British were running short on explosives, and they needed a solvent called acetone to help them in making explosives. It was a very vital component, and they were running short. So Chaim Weizmann develops a bacterial fermentation process to make acetone. They take breweries in England and refit them to make this acetone. And they have plenty of explosives, and the British win the war. And afterwards, they want to thank him and make him a sir or a knight. Well, he's the one that said, I'd really like a homeland for the Jewish people. And Lord Balfour said, what about Uganda? We now, British controls Uganda. He goes, no, I was thinking of the traditional area, like the Middle East. He goes, oh, yeah. And so that's when they give the Balfour Declaration. But somebody threw a monkey wrench in the works. His name was Lawrence of Arabia. He was just a lowly lieutenant stationed in Cairo. And he was given an assignment. Meet with the Arabs, like the head Arab, who's the Sharif of Mecca, and see if maybe the Arab Muslims will help the British defeat the Turkish Muslims. And rather than just report back, Lawrence of Arabia takes it upon himself to promise the Arab Muslims that they will get all the lands in the Middle East if they help the British. And he admitted he lied in his book, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, published 1922. Lawrence of Arabia said, had I been an honest advisor to the Arabs, I would have advised them to go home and not risk their lives fighting for such stuff. I risked the fraud on my conviction that Arab help was necessary to our cheap and speedy victory in the East, and that better we win and break our word than lose. For being a successful trickster, and to prevent this unpleasantness from arising, I began in my report to conceal the true stories of things. So here he would tell the Arabs, you're going to get all the land. But then he would tell the British, oh, no, they don't expect anything. And when Winston Churchill visited Jerusalem and Lawrence of Arabia was his interpreter, he hears all this cheering. He thought that, oh, they were cheering him. No, they were saying, kill the Jews. And and so what happened is the same land is promised to two different groups. This land in the Middle East is now given to the Jews by Lord Balfour, but this unauthorized promise of Lawrence of Arabia, the Arabs expected that all that land in the Middle East would be theirs. And so the British tried to untie this knot a little bit, and the Arab leader, the Sharif of Mecca, they take his son Fazl, and they make him the king of a brand new country called Iraq, which used to be part of the Ottoman Empire for 700 years, but now it's a brand new country called Iraq, and the Sharif's son Fazl's the king. Now, Fazl thought that he also should be king of Syria, but France said, no. This treaty, San Remo gave France protectorate over Syria. So France moves in, and they didn't really be diplomatic about it. They just chased Fazl out. Well, Fazl's brother, Abdullah, starts getting in guerrilla warfare to fight the French. And Winston Churchill's like, whoa. The French are our friends now. We don't want another war with the French. Tell you what I'll do. I will take 2/3 of the land that I gave the Jews with the Balfour Declaration, and I'll create another brand new country that used to be the Ottoman Empire, and I'm going to call it Transjordan, or Jordan, and I'm going to make your brother Abdullah the king of Jordan. And so now you have the Sharif of Mecca, his two sons are now kings, Faisal, king of Iraq, and Abdullah, king of Jordan. And they actually, believe it or not, were friendly to the Jews. So Faisal writes this in 1919. We feel that the Arabs and Jews are cousins, and having suffered similar oppression at the hands of power stronger than themselves, we look with deepest sympathy on the Zionist movement. We will wish the Jews a most hearty welcome home. And then Abdullah writes that he says, no people on earth have been less anti-Semitic than Arabs. The persecution of Jews has been confined almost entirely to Christian nations in the West. Jews themselves will admit that never since the Great Dispersion, right, 70 AD, the Jews are chased out. He's acknowledging that happened. Never since the Great Dispersion did Jews develop so freely and reach such importance as in Spain when it was an Arab possession, right, up until 1492. And with very minor exceptions, Jews have lived for many centuries in the Middle East in complete peace and friendliness with their Arab neighbors. And then you had the Sharif himself. And he says in 1918, the resources of the country are still virgin soil, which will be developed by the Jewish immigrants. That the country is, for its original sons, for all their differences, a sacred and beloved homeland. So now you have these modernist Muslims saying, we have no problem with the Jews having their land. But the Sharif of Mecca waffled on a treaty that the British were doing. And the British said, you know what? We're tired of dealing with you, Sharif. We're just going to stand back and let this other guy take over Arabia. His name was Abdul ibn Aziz Saud, the Saud family. And he was Wahhabi, of chopping off arms and legs. And so the British stand back. And in 1924, the Sauds defeat the Sharif of Mecca. And now the Wahhabis are in control of the Holy Hajj. So once in a faithful Muslim's life, he goes on a pilgrimage to Mecca. And the Sharif was a modernist. He's like, okay, we got Muslims from around the world. Let's just all get along when you come here on pilgrimage and go back and everything's fine. And that modernist, he was tolerant of Jews. He even wrote a letter saying, protect the Armenians that are getting killed in Turkey if they flee into your country. And but now the Wahhabis control Mecca. And Muslims from around the world are getting infected with this Wahhabism. Every terrorist group traces itself back to Wahhabism. And even Lawrence of Arabia said Wahhabism is a heretical Muslim sect. Everything is puritanical. Everything is so strict and forcibly pious. William McCants wrote, the Saudis draw a distinction between true Muslims and the unfaithful Muslims. And in other words, that the Wahhabi are just as happy to kill a moderate Muslim as they are to kill an infidel. And so now you have one group inspired by the Wahhabis was started in 1928 called the Muslim Brotherhood. And they take this Wahhabi teaching and they turn it into a infiltration and assassination plot. So they said Muhammad lived in two cities, Mecca and Medina. In Mecca, Muhammad was a religious leader. In Medina, Muhammad becomes a political and military leader. So this is our blueprint. We're going to have Wahhabi-inspired Muslim Brotherhood people go into countries just being a religious Muslim like Muhammad first was in Mecca. And once you get embedded in these countries, when the signal is given, you flip and become a Medina Muslim, you become political, militant, violent, and you do assassinations. And so the Muslim Brotherhood tried assassinating Nasser, and it was foiled. But now in Egypt, and so now the Muslims are like, these leaders are like, okay, we got to watch out that we don't get assassinated. The other was Ataturk. They tried to assassinate Ataturk. He was the secular leader of Turkey. They caused all kinds of problems wanting to kill the leader in Afghanistan. And then you had Abdullah, that more moderate king of Jordan. He is on the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, like 1931, and he gets assassinated by these Muslim Brotherhood-inspired people. And so now you have the Muslim leaders wanting to become more westernized, more modernist after World War I, but they now are afraid of being assassinated. And then you have the 1967 war, 1972, but then in the Olympics, where the Jews are killed, the 1973 war. And then you have Jimmy Carter and Camp David Accords. And he has Anwar Sadat, head of Egypt, and Menachem Begin, head of Israel, make a peace treaty. They both win the Nobel Peace Prize. And Anwar Sadat is praised by Billy Graham. He's praised by Pat Robertson. And everything looks hopeful until there's a parade in Egypt. The military is marching by. Anwar Sadat's in the bandstand looking at his military. And those Muslim Brotherhood that had infiltrated their military stopped, turned, lowered their machine guns, and filled Anwar Sadat with machine gun bullets. Mubarak, the vice president, was wounded, fell off the podium, but he survived. And so now these leaders in the Middle East, they want to be friends with the West, but they don't want to get assassinated. So they're walking this fine line. And there's more there where, Israel keeps getting pressured to give up more land for peace. But the change happened with Obama.
So,
go ahead. To Egypt, he disinvites Mubarak, fills the seats with Muslim Brotherhood people, and then Obama does the Arab Spring, and he helps use Facebook and all of his community organizing to overthrow these moderate leaders and replace them with Sharia Muslims.
And then when we fast forward to where we are with the campuses today, you have these universities that are just filled with anti-Semitism. And you can see it's not just universities. I can look all over social media. People that appear to be conservative since October 7, all of a sudden we see their anti-Semitic rants against the Jew and against Israel also.
Yeah, it's taken on a prophetic view that here's this tiny little country with 9 million people, surrounded by 400 million Muslims, and a good percentage of those Muslims would be happy to get along, but they don't want to get killed by the fundamental Muslims, and so they're being moved in a fundamental direction, and it's with oil money. So I was in Buffalo, New York, a short time ago, and about 200,000 people, but under Obama and Biden, that's 280,000. They moved in 80,000 Muslims. And now I saw thousands of them in a park. They're walking the streets with their burqas. In Buffalo, they call it Little Baghdad. And so they said that these wealthy Muslims and their fancy cars will pull up in front of a house and say, we want to buy your house. And they're buying up neighborhoods. And I've heard them doing this in Detroit and in cities and countries, cities all around America. And then they take over the neighborhoods. And but again, it's that two-step process of infiltration and then become militant and take over. And there's a big concern about a lot of illegal immigrants coming across the southern border. Some of them are Chinese men of military age, but also some of them are fundamentalist Muslim terrorists. And the planes land and go past the terminal and then stop, and then buses come up and they take these illegals, put them on buses and ship them to cities all around America. And the Catholic charities and Lutheran charities take them and sign them up for all the welfare programs. And so they're a permanent burden on the local communities. I was in one city, the pastor pointed out a motel. He goes, the government rents every room every night and fills it full of illegals. And they don't know any skills. They don't know language. They're just wandering around. And they end up going to the inner cities with their burqas and men smoking cigarettes. And he says, we don't feel like it's our city anymore. And if anybody says anything bad, they're saying, oh, well, you're an intolerant Christian nationalist just because you want to preserve your own culture. And they say, you're hateful and you don't even know it. And just they put the kids in the school and they say, well, Christians can do separation of church and state, but we can't. And so we have to have our 5 times a day prayers, and you're hateful and you don't know it. Just by having Saturday and Sunday off rather than Friday, that's insulting us. Just by having Christmas and Easter off, that's insulting. You have to unlearn everything. In other words, you have to become a servant to us. And so we're like, okay, we'll roll out the red carpet. And so they're taking over. And it's Deuteronomy 28, it's blessings and cursings. It says, if a nation does not hearken to the voice of the Lord, the stranger will come in amongst them and rise up above them. And they will be the head and you'll be the tail. They'll be above and you'll be beneath, right? And so it's a judgment. How did God judge ancient Israel? When they sinned, he let them get overrun by the stranger, the Amalekite, Hittite, Moabite, termite, mosquito bite, parasite, and right, all the ites. But then when they repented, he would raise up a deliverer and chase them out. Now we love the people, we just don't like the ideology,
Well,
right? It's not the hardware problem; it's a software problem. It's not, the skin color. It's what behavioral teaching, and it's that Wahhabi teaching that is the violent one.
so and as we look at ancient history, we can see it was the leaders who made these decisions. You had judges involved, you had princes involved, you had these various people. Even within, when you look at ancient Israel, ancient Judah, you have issues with the temple priests, false prophets, as we see a very similar dynamic today. And again, this quote from earlier, unrestrained immigration is followed by outright invasion, which is really what you're describing, but it is, to me, it is definitely intentional. You have this quote, we're almost done here. William Harrison, 1841, wrote, "The love of power is a dominant passion of the human bosom. When this corrupting passion once takes possession of the human mind, like the love of gold, it becomes insatiable." And this is where we are. And we have these leaders that are going in this direction. Bill, we're out of time, but I want to encourage people, they can follow you. How can people follow you?
Oh, well, thanks, Pastor Tom. It's AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. And I want to encourage people to get the books on socialism and silence equals consent, the sin of omission. And it helps to unpack a lot of what's going on today. And I just appreciate Hope for Our Times and all that you're doing. Tom, you and Jackie are an inspiration to us.
Thank you so much, Bill. Again, these books are both available. And honestly, Bill just scratched the surface of the things that are in here. And you really want to find out more. You're going to be blessed with being able to understand the different dynamics and be able to work out these things for yourself with both these books. I encourage you to get them. Thank you so much, Bill, for joining us. Can't wait to have you back on. Oh, by the way, we have a conference coming up in November in Southern California. Bill's going to be joining us. It's going to be a very large conference. It's going to be in November 8, 9, and 10. We'll get you more information as we just put things out there in the coming weeks. But I would just say save the date now, November 8, 9, and 10. It will be in Southern California. It's going to be a rather huge conference, I would say. You're going to be, it's just going to be fantastic. But with that, if you would also like, subscribe, and share this video, it's really the only way we can get the word out if you share it. So thank you. Think of one friend or two friends you can just share it with. That'd be terrific. It would really help us out here. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Bill, thank you again. You're always a blessing. Look forward to seeing you in the near future, but also coming up in November right here in Southern California. God bless everybody.